Hello, everyone, and welcome to Lit Chick on a Mighty Blaze. I'm Jenna Paone, and I am so thrilled today. I have three of my favorite authors for the price of one. The dynamic powerhouse writing team, Team W, is in the house. Beatriz Williams, Lauren Willig, and Karen White. Ladies, welcome. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you for
having us. This is great.
I love it. We almost didn't come live because honestly, we had a big hair discussion going on. It is humid out here. We are all dealing with it. If you're in the Northeast, that is, it is humid. And
yeah,
it is. I'm in Georgia. Don't talk to me about humidity.
Yeah, right? It's always humid.
All right, yes.
Right?
Hence the ponytail.
But I live in an old house, so no matter what you do with your air conditioning, you can't escape this situation.
And I had to walk my kids to school through a monsoon this morning, so I've still got the angry poodle hair.
So we're all struggling, and we're so happy that you're here today. We're so thrilled for all of you joining us at home. Thank you. We're here to celebrate your new collaborative novel, The Lost Summers of Newport, which is everything I love in books. Oh my gosh, it's just the best.
Yay. Oh, I'm sorry.
This book just...
If you have a telescope, you can see Karen's.
This book just absolutely made my week. I mean, what a pleasure to read. It's such a gorgeous escape. Everything I love in a novel. We've got so many secrets and so much intrigue, and we've got glamorous Newport. You can never do better than Newport, in my opinion, for a setting, for a novel, especially a historical one, because obviously Gilded Age glamour. Before we get into the book, I'm just going to give a quick background about all three of you, even though I'm sure every single person out there knows exactly who you are and loves you. Welcome to Team W, and congratulations on the release of The Lost Summers of Newport. Team W is the powerhouse writing team of New York Times bestselling authors Beatriz Williams, Lauren Willig, and Karen White. Beatriz Williams is the best-selling author of New York Times bestselling author of 13 novels, including Her Last Flight, The Summer Wives, and The Golden Hour. She lives with her husband and 4 children near the Connecticut shore, where she divides her time between writing and laundry, as we all do. Lauren Willig is the New York Times and USA Today bestselling author of 20 novels, including The Summer Country, The Ashford Affair, and The English Wife. She lives in New York City with her husband and family. And Karen White is the New York Times and USA Today bestselling author of 25 novels, including Dreams of Falling and The Nights the Lights Went Out. She has 2 grown children and currently lives near Atlanta, Georgia, with her husband and 2 spoiled Havanese dogs. The Lost Summers of Newport is a novel of money and secrets set among the famous summer mansions of Newport, Rhode Island, spanning over a century from the Gilded Age to the present day. Good Morning America calls it an engrossing and sumptuous tale, and in a starred review, Publishers Weekly says 3 stories elegantly intertwine in this clever and stylish tale of murder and family lies. This crackerjack novel offers 3 mysteries for the price of 1. Welcome, ladies, and congratulations again.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
It's so fabulous. So usually I start off by asking folks to kind of, tell me a little bit about the novel and the inspiration behind, but I want to bring it back even further for you. Because, of course, this is a novel that you write together, and it's the 4th one that you've released together. How did all of this start? How did you decide? You're all incredibly successful in your own right. You certainly can write your own, individual books. What made you decide to write as a team? Tell me about the original process behind that.
Well, it's the classic story. 3 authors walk into a bar.
Which is the actual truth. We had, I think it was the summer of 2012, and we'd all just kind of come off releasing our own summer books, and we were commiserating about, the sorrows of book touring by yourself, and really we were at the bar drinking lots of wine.
It was at a writers' conference because we're all about work. We are WWW. So it was a writers' conference, but we were in the bar. Yes.
We had our W wine.
Yeah. And it just seemed for some reason, and we were sitting there and as it does, the conversation turns to sort of sheep jokes and that kind of thing. You see our
so your sheep, that's your mascot, right?
It's our mascot, kind of like a spirit animal, I think. And
it is our spirit animal.
And so under the influence of all this, incredibly sophisticated humor and incredibly sophisticated alcohol, we thought it'd be a really good idea. Hey, we could solve all these sorrows of solo book tours by writing a book together and getting our publisher to pay for us to go on the road together, and critical here, pay for our bar bill.
Yes.
This was the motivation.
That is the most important thing, right? Is getting the bar bill.
But even more important,
you're ordering the champagne.
Oh, exactly. Most important, though, was the setting, because where did we want our publisher to send us on book tour? So obviously, and also for research, because, obviously this would be such a fabulous idea that our publisher would probably send us to wherever we're writing about setting the book to research, right? Because that's what they do. Yep. Anyway, so of course, with sheep, and we weren't sheepish about the jokes being passed around. We're like, what's the perfect place for?
They were pretty bad.
Really bad.
Woolly. So we're thinking Scotland.
Yes.
Men in kilts.
And I had the perfect idea because my debut novel had come out at the same time as another debut novel that did a little bit better than mine, which was 50 Shades of Grey. Right. So we're like, okay, Scotland, sheep, we'll call it 50 Shades of Plaid.
Most brilliant idea ever.
Such a brilliant idea. We stumble out of the bar, and there is like Karen's editor standing right there.
Editor, by the way.
Lucky editor right there.
Yeah, and she was like,
that's a bad idea. No.
She didn't say it was bad. She just sort of, stared at us, took a step back because of all the fumes, and basically told us to go sleep it off. So, and to that point, she was my long time editor, and she'd had a lot of respect for me up until that moment.
I was just like, and now you have a new editor.
Same editor,
Yeah, I'm just kidding. That's so great. So how does the process work? So I number one, I love this because I come from the music industry before doing books. And so I was in a band for many years, and I've always written collaboratively, like songwriting wise, and with a lot of different people. I wrote for and with people who are much more successful than I. And that's sort of an interesting thing because you're sort of in the room together and you're just kind of throwing out ideas and blah, blah, blah. Mm-hmm. How does it work for you? Obviously in these novels, which is so smart. I mean, I feel like you made it as easy for yourselves as possible in the sense that you always have three narrators and three points of view. Does one of you take each person as are you the point person for that character? And do you carry it through and then do the others do notes? Like, what's the process? And do you send it right after you complete the chapter? Tell somebody to walk me through the actual.
The beginning of the process is not that different from your songwriting process. So we always get together in person in some deeply horrible place like Alice's Teacup in New York or Karen's Beach House in Florida.
Oh, miserable.
It's all work. I'm telling you.
We suffer for our art. And we hash out the whole outline together.
Yes, which is something we don't do individually, but you have to when you're writing.
We have since tried to do this individually with our own books. Like, okay, this time I am going to outline the whole thing chapter by chapter in great detail, and then the writing will be a breeze. And it doesn't actually work with only one brain at work on it. So, but when the three of us are together, there's this wonderful alchemical process.
It's a magic thing.
We just start brainstorming the plot and the characters. And once we sort of feel like we know who these people are, we start doing this very detailed chapter by chapter outline. And it's only when we get to the end of that outlining process, kind of right at the end at the bottom of this synopsis, that we each claim a character. So the whole thing is created together, and that way we all have ownership over it. So it's really kind of like you're the person who's giving voice to a particular character, but we all have kind of a common ownership.
Absolutely.
And how do you determine who gets to write who? Like, are we battling it out? Do the sheep decide who gets to write?
We haven't yet. It's weird.
The sheep decide.
We really like. I mean, the whole process was basically three authors stepping out of their comfort zones. So it would make sense. I mean, I think that's one of the pieces of magic that brings us together, is that we enjoy stepping out of we enjoy doing that, sort of trying something new. Even though we were three successful authors, why not? And so I think we use this opportunity as well to write outside our comfort zone, to a character we haven't written before. And I think that's also one of the main reasons why most readers, including our editors, because we've now had 2 editors for these projects, don't know who wrote what part, because just because it's a Southern character doesn't mean that I wrote it, or if it's, a New York City person like we had in The Forgotten Room does not necessarily mean it was Lauren, or was it? I mean, you know, we mix it up.
We like to mess with readers as well.
We do.
So we're like, okay, we know that people are going to think that Lauren wrote that character, so we'll definitely not have Lauren write it. On the other hand, they might know that we would not let Lauren write that character because it'd be too obvious. So maybe we will have Lauren write that character. You know, so we really, you know, there's several levels and layers going on here. Right. But what it kind of comes down to is that sort of a combination of, oh, I want to try something different, or for some reason, a particular character like speaks to me or speaks to Karen or speaks to Lauren. And it's very, I don't think we've ever like had any fights over this.
There's never been any conflict. We've never had two of us wanting the same character at the same time.
That's it. All right. So now we're going to turn to the Lost Summers of Newport because we have these three incredible. Number one, I love this book. I love Newport. I'm a Newport person. I'm from Massachusetts, but a lot of big moments in my life, including my engagement and wedding, happened in Newport. And that is like, Newport's a very special place to me. And the Newport mansions are a very special place to me. I'm pretty sure when I was like 6, I said to my mom, I want to get married at Rosecliff. And my mom was like, okay, sure. Like, now, I didn't actually get married at Rosecliff. I got married at a different mansion, but it was lovely. But I have been to Rosecliff many a time, been to Marble House, been to, you know, the Breakers, obviously, all of those. And I love, so at the center of this book is Sprague Hall, which is kind of like the alternative Newport mansion. I mean, this place is quirky. This is not the Breakers. This is somebody trying to be the Breakers and not quite succeed.
Right.
It's at the center of the novel, and we have 3 time periods. We have, the Gilded Age told through the character Ellen. We have the 1950s told through Lucky, and we have present day with Andy. Now, I want to know who. I do want to know who wrote who. I have an idea. No, you won't tell. You'll never tell.
We won't tell you. We can't tell you.
All right. So let's start with how you decided to place the stories in this era. Did the location of Newport come first and then the historical time periods, or was it reversed?
Well, I mean, this actually really all started with Beatriz's habit of procrastinating, because Beatriz, every morning over her morning coffee reads through really highbrow publications like the Daily Mail, and then sends me and Karen.
Oh, Jenna, you too.
Come on, we all do it. Let's face it.
My husband's like, please stop. You could have written 15,000 books if you would just.
I know, right?
It's like it feeds your ideas, right? Doesn't it?
Exactly.
Because you're a novelist, so you need to know what people are up to.
Then she procrastinates text to Lauren and myself.
The good ones.
And we procrastinate to read them.
Yes, I pray for you, so you don't have to go through all those, depressing headlines.
I know.
And I happened to find this story about a reality show in the UK where it was like a kind of a house makeover show where they go to these stately old piles in the countryside and they renovate while the reality show cameras are going. And of course, as with, most reality shows, it's really about the people. It's about the history, the family, and the squabbles and the secrets that come out as the layers of wallpaper and, coming down and the walls are being knocked down. And I said, oh my gosh, this is a perfect W story, multiple generations, big old house with lots of secrets. Why don't we set it? We could set it in the United States. And, immediately, when you think of these types of houses, you think of Newport.
Right.
So that meant automatically we knew that one of our sections was going to be, in the present during this mansion makeover, but also in the Gilded Age. So we had our 2 bookends already there. And then the big question was, what's our middle section going to be?
And we knew that, Well, we knew that renovation and restoration and historic preservation would have to be a big part of it because of the Gilded Age when these mansions were created, and now when they're crumbling messes and whatever. So I think, again, it was a scroll that Beatriz was doing and found out about the Tiffany Ball in 1957, in which Jackie and Jack Kennedy.
I know, it was this
Marble House. And we're thinking, the 50s in Newport, that would be perfect.
And and I think also I was thinking of that moment in High Society. I'm sure we've all seen High Society, right? Grace Kelly is the remake of Philadelphia Story, and she's driving around. The reporter is played by Frank Sinatra, and they're driving past all these mansions, and she's like, "Oh, that one was sold for taxes. That one is now a boarding school." And it seemed to me that the 1950s was this transition point throughout kind of America, but especially encapsulated in Newport, where all of a sudden, like, the next generation just cannot keep up these houses. They're not making the same amount of money. There's all these taxes, labor costs are going up. So the mansions are getting sold for a song. They're getting torn down and ugly apartment buildings put up. And that's when the movement, the restoration movement, the preservation movement really takes hold. And of course, the Tiffany Ball is kind of like the big social event that kind of encapsulates all of that. It was big, it was glamorous, it was held at Marble House. Tiffany, loaned this gorgeous 122 karat yellow diamond for one of the patronesses to wear. It was a spectacular social event. So that, hey, if you're looking for a narrative arc, hey, a big party is always
great to us. Immediately thought, if we write part of the book in that period, maybe we could get Tiffany to loan us the diamond for
that. Was
lawn.
another thought.
Oh my gosh.
They did not
Tiffany,
respond.
where are you? Where are
emails?
They even offered to, use my husband's chainsaw to cut it in thirds so we can fight over who or which.
And they just
so you could fashion it into
whatsoever to any of our phone calls or messages.
We
the notes with the white powder.
A little sheep setting.
Little sheep. Just break up that canary diamond into
we turned up dressed in black in the middle of the night. They just
it just wasn't popular with that.
I love this so much. All right, let's go back to Sprague Hall. And by the way, I think some folks have already started doing this, but please put your questions for the ladies in the chat, and we will try to get to some at the end. I'm sure we'll be able to. But let's talk about Sprague Hall. Sprague Hall is just lovely. I mean, Sprague Hall is my favorite type of kind of, it's perfect for the setting because you have these legit mansions, and then this is sort of the upstart new money trying to come in and and keep up with the Joneses, so to speak, or keep up with the with
the Vanderbilt,
so to speak.
Right.
So tell me about designing Sprague Hall. And as Susie pointed out, Karen, your daughter has expertise in historical restoration that you guys put to use. Tell us about how you went about researching, and kind of the mansions themselves, and then building your own mansion from the ground up.
Well, I do know, for one, we all go immediately to, and this was COVID time, so it's not like we could go out and visit archives or whatever. But luckily, there are so many wonderful books written about Gilded Age mansions. And if I knew exactly where to pull it, but we all ended up with the same one. I mean, like stacks like this, but one particular one that, and plus all the news articles, like how they found platinum walls at one of the, I think it was at the Breakers. And so there was so much. And we had all visited Newport. So we had in our mind, the excess that needed to be. And then we borrowed an old house from one of Lauren's books, The English Wife, that had to be sold very quickly. And then that enabled the Spragues to buy it cheaply, and then to sort of renovate to make it look like a Marble House or a Breakers, but using every shortcut in the book that we did get. I was able to call my daughter, because she's cheap and easy research, and say, okay, if we wanted to not have marble columns and make them look like marble, but do it cheaply and that won't last, what will we do? And so Sprague Hall is full of those little easy fixes, which is one of the reasons why it's crumbling in modern day.
It's only the opposite of the Breakers, where they were like, oh no, our platinum walls are too tacky. Let's paint it over with plain green paint so we don't look so lavish. Whereas here, they're desperately trying to get the maximum bang for the minimum buck.
Right. Yes.
Of course, and that's of course the lovely tension that exists always between, old money and new money. And, I think especially this is such a great time for this book to come out, because we're all still coming off of the Gilded Age TV show. And I feel like, and we're in our, it just feels like there's a lot of good Newport stuff going on right now.
Yes.
Now, you did eventually get to Newport together. I'm sure you've all been separately, but
Yes.
what was that trip like besides a lot of champagne and I assume diamonds and Vanderbilts?
Oh, of course. Maybe I slept through that. I don't remember that part. But so obviously during 2020, April of 2020, we were supposed to go. We'd already had our reservations at restaurants and then this lovely bed and breakfast. And sadly, 2020. So we had to do our initial thing by FaceTime.
Yes.
But last August, when we were finishing the book, you know, the pandemic had sort of come to a standstill and we're like, this is the time to go. So we did meet in Newport last August and we had a blast. Like we did house tours, we did the cliff walk, we walked Newport and really got it because it had been a while since I had been there. Beatriz lives a lot closer and she had been there.
I was able to do some recon during the pandemic. So, and this was, you know, for some reason, it always ended up being during the wild and woolly weather. So, you know, we come up and we bring the dog, my husband and I'd be walking along the cliff path and I would like, you know, we were worried because there's a boathouse that is a major part of the story. And as I'm going along the cliff walk, I'm not seeing any boathouses and I'm in a panic. So I'm like, what if nobody has a boathouse? What if this is just not a thing that you do? And finally I found this boathouse. And, you know, as I'm FaceTiming them and I'm like, guys, it's a boathouse. I found a boathouse and it's right next to
it's like gale force winds. We're like, don't step off the cliff.
Somebody get a shovel.
It was perfect. So yeah, and so I did do the recon, you know, so that I had been obviously to Newport before, but it was really good to really get that,
more
you know, just more intimate sense of how the buildings related to each other, and you know
Sheep
how
Cove,
all the
you
cliffs
found
really
Sheep
were,
Cove.
and all those little things that it's hard to get when you're just looking at, you know, Google Earth and all that kind of thing. So
right, I love that. I mean, and you really did feel that. Like I did feel very like oriented in the town. You know, like I believed that this place existed and like it made sense, you know, geographically and with everything else, it made a lot of sense and put me right in there. I always love an imaginary setting within a real setting. I don't know. There's something about that just like really
they literally kind of carved out a little space between a couple of known estates, and that's
exactly.
Yeah. It's like platform 9.5 in the
It is exactly
or whatever it is.
Yes, exactly. Now let's talk about the rest of filling in the novel. So like this novel is, I mean, it is secret after secret after secret after twist. I mean, I have a friend, Jen DeLeon, who's a YA author and close friend, and she always says that secrets and lies are the protein of fiction. And this is like a juicy steak. I mean, this book is just secret on top of secrets. When going back, so we've got our setting, we've got our historical, you know, time periods. Then I assume comes character and then plot, or does plot come first and then character, or do they come simultaneously? I love hearing about like which piece, like how the pieces fall into place.
Well, first, we're incredibly character driven, all three of us. And so it's always character first, because otherwise, you would wind up trying to shape the characters around the plot and forcing them to do things that aren't really in character for them. So we always start with the people and what they're like and what drives them. And then we see what makes sense for them.
We do a lot of backstory on our characters that you will never see in the pages, but because we need to understand where they're coming from, why they are the way they are, and what their relationship is with these other characters. Exactly. So yes, characters are definitely, I mean, setting definitely first, and then the characters and how they relate to the setting or how the setting relates to them, because our books are definitely character driven, including our own books. So it's just how we write.
Exactly. And that actually strikes me as one reason why you're able to work so well together is it seems like you sort of approach writing in general in the same way. And you also, I mean, I know with any of your books, I'm getting incredibly strong and complex and feisty women that are going to be at the center of this story, which is no disappointment here. And they're going to be devastatingly witty and also, you know, incredibly strong and run the gamut of they're going to be complicated and we're maybe not going to like some things about them and they're going to be, you know, questionable. Why is it important to you as writers to center women's voices, and how do you go about accurately rendering complex, real women on the page?
Can I take the first stab at this one? And just very simply, the three of us, although we're very, very good friends, we have very, very different lives right now. Lauren has the two little ones. Beatriz has 4, 2 in college, 2 getting there. My 2 kids are grown. My daughter's it's getting married this year. I'm caring for my 2 elderly parents with Alzheimer's. So, but as women, we understand, we talk about everything, not just the books, but what's going on. And the same theme is how, as women in our families, we are the ones who are at the helm of the ship, whether it's our own careers and our books that we are doing or our own lives. I mean, I have 3 brothers, yet I'm still doing everything for the parents, So, and I think, with Lauren and it's the same thing. We just, the caregivers, the everything givers, and I think you have to be very, very strong to be able to pull that load. And I think that it obviously, that's what we want to write about. We want to share this strength with the world that women, and sometimes women don't know how strong they are until, there really is no other choice. And I love those kinds of characters that just realize it, because I think the 3 of us, we've done things in the last 20 years that we never thought we'd be capable of. And we do it with panache. So
absolutely. I love that.
We're all really fascinated by women's histories, whether they're personal histories, family histories, or history. And I think one of the things that we all agree on is that historically women are so much stronger than they've been given credit for.
100%.
Find those women, it's not a historical, it's simply recentering them in the historical narrative.
Right.
I love that, in the way that they should be. I mean, this is like,
yes.
This has always existed. It's just, I think,
history is written by men. Let's face it. Okay.
And I also think, we have this thing, we tend to define women's strength or evaluate whether or not women are strong by sort of a male definition of strength.
Absolutely.
And, as you were touching on, there's all kinds of different kinds of strength. And I love that women exhibit strength in different ways. And some are sort of warrior type women, and more power to them. And some are, that quiet strength that really just holds up the community and holds up the home and holds up, their families.
Mm-hmm.
And, and again, I think what interests all 3 of us, again, we write very different types of fiction in our own books, our individual books. But the thread that kind of connects them is like, okay, yes, there are these big historical events and people who move history.
Right.
And traditionally that's been seen as the focus of historical research. But you could argue that everyday life, that the fabric and the tapestry of people's lives is just as important a part of history. It is how people experience history when they're living in it. It is the sense of history not being history, but as being somebody's contemporary life that they're trying to get through. So, I think historical fiction in general that's written by particularly women, and certainly the historical fiction that we write tends to focus on that. How do these, big historical events, how do they affect people living their own lives? How does that change the course of history in the sense that it changes people's lives?
I could not agree more. I mean, that's why I love historical fiction. That was always, to me, the thing in history. Like, when you're reading your dry history book, and then you get to sort of like the cultural paragraphs where it's like what people were reading and doing and eating, and like that was always the most interesting.
Exactly. They're putting arsenic on their faces. Like who would have known? That's the interesting part.
100%.
And that's why her husband dies when he kisses her.
And like that's the thing, is everyday life. That to me is why I love his.
Yes.
I prefer to learn in the context of. This is why I love fiction, historical fiction. I prefer to learn in the context of a story. I prefer to have my eyes opened in subtle ways in terms of character struggle and things on the page like that. And I love there's so much in this book from a historical standpoint about the idea that sort of there's no money or power that isn't tainted in some way. There's no one whose hands are fully clean. There's no one who kind of can survive unscathed in a way. And yet it's also it's presented in this, I think, ultimately hopeful way of, the idea that yes, we have to acknowledge our own complicity and wrongdoing, but at the same time, we also have to move forward and live our lives. And clearly, you wrote this book during a time of intense upheaval, and that we're still living through, and it seems to still be, we're living through historic times right now. What is it like to be authors of historical fiction during this current present age? And what was it like writing this book during the time of COVID and many other social reckonings and discussions of equity and a million other things? Like, what is it like, and where we're calling to mind our own social wrongs and kind of bringing some of these issues to the forefront?
Honestly, it's incredibly reassuring writing about other people going through tempestuous, unsettled, uncertain times, particularly in these sorts of multi-timeline books we write, because yes, we have the comfort of knowing how the Gilded Age ended. We have the comfort of knowing, what happens next, but
we survived. I think that's the best message. We survived.
Yes. I love that. Yeah, that's and it's interesting because, again, like I do feel like in general, I'm seeing this as a trend in books in general, where I do feel like I'm seeing like more complicity on the part of protagonists. Like I do feel like we're moving away from sort of the protagonist is the eternally good
right. You're right.
Yeah,
absolutely right.
Yeah. What is it like to kind of write that? Have you felt that shift as authors? Have you felt compelled to increase sort of the complexity, or not the complexity so much, but maybe the dichotomies that exist in, like, have you felt that consciously, or is that just something that's emerged now?
I think it's just because I love to read historical fiction, and I think reading that, and when I'm reading about a heroine who is like so clean, so far removed from some of those yucky things that are going on in her society, I don't enjoy them because it's not real. I would rather write about a more complex character who knows that things aren't right, but is living her life and trying to do the best she can, because that is real. I want to read about real people, not imagined people. I want to be able to believe that I'm like that, flawed but fixable, and understanding what's going on in my world. And I think that is reflected in my own writing.
Yeah. I think even, no, go ahead, Lauren.
I was going to say, I think we all grew up on the big old blockbusters like Forever Amber and Gone with the Wind, some of which had very morally ambivalent heroines. Right. And we were all fascinated with that dynamic, with what makes a person good versus not good, what makes a person understandable as heroine of her own story without necessarily being a universal heroine.
Yeah, and I think something that sort of characterizes, what's going on now is there's this sense of, oh gosh, we need to, to I guess impose our own standards of moral purity on another age, and and I think that it's not that that every age does not have injustice in which it is complicit, but we have this particular blind spot that we can't see the injustice that we ourselves are committing. So I think that, what we want to do is to not shy away from the things that are going on that are unjust, and to not try and create this character who is really technically a modern person who has all the modern sensibilities about these things and is living in our age, because that's not realistic. What we want to do is say, hey, we all have this, we all have the potential to do bad things and to be unjust in our own actions and in our own lives. Every single one of us does. How do we move beyond that? How do we learn? How do we forgive each other for the injustice in the past? Just as we hope one day to be forgiven for all the things that we are even unwittingly doing now that are unjust or wrong or bad or oppressive to others. So, I think it's important to keep that perspective and to not judge so harshly people who were living in their times according to the context that they grew up in, because guess what? We wouldn't have been any different. There are very few people, who are those drivers of change.
And to insert a 21st century look as an author, giving that 21st century consciousness to a 19th century character is so flawed and so not real. It's I don't enjoy reading that, so I attempt not to write that as well.
Well, and I think it also goes back to our being character driven, because there's no point if your character doesn't have room to grow and change and develop over the course of the book.
Right.
I love that. And of course, character is the most important. However, I know when I'm going to read any one of your books that I am going to get all of the fun details. I'm going to get what people were wearing, what they were eating, the parties, obviously. I mean, there's nothing I love more than a good party, a good ball, the jewelry, all of those things. And I'm also going to get language that is so rich. And I feel like particularly the language to me really grounds me in that historical, and I feel like you all do this in such a good way. How do you incorporate those historical details and that historical sort of cadence and word choice? And how much fun is it? Because I feel like you just sort of revel in that. And like, do you like sketch out, do you find pictures of the dresses and sort of, bring them in, or how does it work for each of you? And how do you kind of approach those little details?
I do think we have a similar approach. I mean, obviously we have a certain knowledge, but already, but we try not to rely on that because it's flawed. I know during one of our books together, we all bought the Sears catalog from the 19, whatever that time period was.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that, then you have a picture, what this is called or whatever, and to know, and especially at that price point, we know that wasn't the couture that the lady of the house was wearing. This is what, a nice dress that, one of the characters would be wearing. And I know that we also love, however we find it, first accounts, either newspaper, because you can go into the newspaper articles to find how people spoke, and you can find letters, especially when we did the Lusitania book, reading letters from survivors, and just really getting the cadence and the word choices and all of that. I mean, firsthand sources are, I think, our bread and butter, and then we kind of go from there.
Yeah, I think I love old movies. Old movies have been great for me in terms of getting a real feel for not just what people said, but sort of how they said it, and gestures. And I remember when I wrote 100 Summers all those years ago, I was literally halfway through the book before I was like, oh, wait a minute, nobody's smoking, and obviously everybody's gonna be smoking, and cocktail in one hand, cigarette in the other, and so I've never smoked before, so it was with great relish that I started everybody smoking. But it's also the great thing about something like that is it's a tell, because whether or not you smoke, the times at which you smoke, the manner in which you hold your cigarette, are you acting like you really need it, or are you just, is it just a prop? There's all kinds of ways that, it gives you a whole new, means to explain what's on the character's mind, as we like to do, showing, not telling. You can show what's on the character's mind and how the character's feeling without saying he was angry, or, describing it, instead of really showing it by what they're doing and how they're saying things. So
for me, I mean, there's also period novels, and I find particularly less the sort of the big novels of the era and more the light fiction of the era. So for example, when I was doing a 1920s book, I read through tons of Dorothy Sayers and Agatha Christie because I was looking for what my old advisor back in grad school when I was doing history used to call accidental evidence. The things people mention, but not specifically, because they're not trying to prove anything. They're not trying to show anything. It just happens to be that's what that character is wearing, or that's the slang that character is using that year. And they drop in very naturally because that's their habitat. Right. And then you lift these things and you can put them in your work.
Right. And that is the most fun part of research. I've done that a few times too. And that is amazing just to find it.
You don't even feel like you're doing research.
amazing.
You're like, oh, I'm just reading these novels for research or watching this.
But that's exactly it.
Because you pick up the cadences and the rhythm,
Yes.
and they become very natural to you after a
And
while.
how they describe things, and things that you don't use today, like
it's very easy when you're writing historical fiction to over-explain, to say, well, the crinoline was a blah blah blah. If you're an actual person living in that era, you don't need to explain to anybody some particular article of clothing you're wearing or what your drink is made of or whatever. It's or even what music people are listening to. It's just part of the wallpaper of your life. So that is the best way you can write historical fiction, is just keep the explanations to a minimum. Just make it the wallpaper that surrounds
your characters.
I love it. The information comes from the absence of too much information. That's like, I do feel like that's where the natural, the natural, it makes it feel more real, right? It makes it feel more real.
We all go through and we cut out so much.
Oh, it breaks our hearts.
We have a couple questions from the audience. I'm going to ask one more of my own and then get to those real quick. And then we're going to, cap it off with a really fun one. But first, so the world of the Lost Summers of Newport, as any novel worth their salt set in Newport would be, is one where privilege and struggle coexist. And we have a bit of the upstairs, downstairs. And of course, there is an examination, I think, in many of your books about this, and particularly the books you write together focus on that we're focusing on a certain section of society, right? Which I love. I mean, I'll be honest, I that's what I love. Like, I like the Gilded Age.
The world loves it. I mean, look at the success of the Gilded Age and Downton Abbey. I think we're still now, supposing America, we're a classless system. No, that is not true. There will always be the haves and the have-nots, and people looking to people with fabulous wealth. I mean, now it's the movie stars, right? But I think
and it cycles through. I love how who's on top in one era is not necessarily who's going to be in top in the next era. And it's that cycling through.
It's all about money and power.
And how it relates to the mores and the aspirational ideals of the time, because as different groups cycle through, they have different aesthetics and different goals, and also different myths and lies they tell themselves and others.
And access to education. The reason why women were never really, if you were not born into an aristocratic family, you had, school teacher, domestic servant, government, and now, and then as education was offered more broadly to women, that also changed another, power structure and all of that. So I find it just fascinating. Yeah,
I do as well.
It'll be very interesting to see this historical fiction another 80 to 100 years about the wealthier classes today. And
you're already saying the 80s is historical fiction. I'm like, what?
That's so alarming.
I mean, I think aren't 2010s like historical fiction or something? It's crazy. They're not. But, it's getting later and later, and it's really scary.
I prefer to call it vintage fiction.
Vintage.
I think it's just interesting because there's, now we have sort of we have obviously celebrities, and we have people like the Kardashians that are like our version of that, but that's not really. I mean, you still have the Gettys and the
industrial
those family. You still have the ruling class families, whether or not you realize who
they're just not on reality television.
Actually, less visible now.
Yes. And we do have a rising industrial class of staggering wealth.
Yes,
Elon Musk.
It's like the railroad money
scale, exactly, as
in 70s.
Yeah,
absolutely. It's really, I know it'll be really interesting to see what happens. We're going to take a couple of questions from the audience. I'm going to do from Sharon. Is the book title the original title?
It is.
Actually, yes.
We went through the lists, the brainstorming lists, and this was the one our editor picked out. So,
well, we liked it the most, so we put it at the top.
Our favorite.
And said we like this one the most, and she's like, "Good, I like it the most too." And it was the easiest title selection that we have been through.
Yes. And in fact, it was supposed to be an October book. And as soon as we decided on the Lost Summers of Newport, like a few weeks later, we get an email. So do you think you can be ready to release in May? So this could be our editor is literal that way. She likes a book that says summer on it to be a summer book. And we said, sure,
Of course.
At what stage did the title come into play? Was it after you wrote it, or was
the
it
end after we finished?
After we outlined, remember?
Well,
And then we saw your Palmetto
Oh,
Bluff.
that's right, because our editor needed a title, to launch it, I think. But I'm not sure we got I can't
We
even
did
remember.
that. We were
finalized the title.
We were sitting at the restaurant over breakfast or dinner in Palmetto Bluff, and we sat around, brainstormed. I think it was breakfast. We brainstormed. We wrote everything down.
Oh, that was for All the Ways We Said Goodbye.
Then we sent it to
All the Ways We Said Goodbye. It was at the end when we were editing, and we did at dinner on our last night.
Was that?
That was that one.
Oh, that's right. Different book. I'm sorry.
It blurs after a while. And we all have pandemic brain.
And wedding brain.
I think this was when we were in Newport, we came up with the title.
It might have been Newport. I think it was. Because I think it's where we send it in. I mean, we need to have kind of a working title just to have something to name the file. But then
working titles are a little dubious usually.
Yes, we sometimes have those.
Although this was, I think, the All the Ways cycle. Like All the Ways I'm late with this chapter, because our last book was All the Ways We Said Goodbye. So this was like all the ways this book is gilded. Right. And so we changed the title every time we email it to each other.
I love
not to be confused with The Glass Ocean, which was about Lusitania, and one of the ones was,
to be fair, our husband started this, by the way.
Well, this was Karen's husband started it because Karen was like, "We need a title for this book," and he was like, "The Lusitania book."
Yeah,
right. Yes, and I had a book called The Memory of Water, so he says, "What about The Memory of Air?" Which is terrible and horrible.
Yeah, I know. It was definitely dark humor at work, but then once you start, you can't stop.
Like, every time
all the air we cannot breathe.
I know, right? And the kelp, that's one of my favorites.
Oh, and Krautlander.
I love this. I
have a lot of fun.
We can all play this game, like
forever. Now I'm going to do that
because there were like 30 chapters in that book. There were 30 different equally horrible titles, and then we sent the whole list to our editor, who was like,
"No,
you're not planning to use these, are you?"
Yeah, although you have to be careful with Rachel, because you can give her a title that you think is a joke, and she will think it's a great title.
Yes.
See, Lauren's holding her head. You'll find out when her book is released next year. 2 Wars and a Wedding.
Two Wars and a Wedding.
That's a joke. But that's
a great book. I don't know why that title.
My husband is a professor, and every one of his papers that he releases very subtly is named after a classic rock song. And most people don't realize this, but it's like and he writes like very, very dense economic and managerial science papers that are very, very they're basically all math, and I don't understand any of them. But you got to have a good title that's like a very clever nod to something. My
advisor used to like to work. He was a Tudor Stewart guy. Used to like to work in Monty Python jokes into his titles.
Okay. All right.
And speaking of that, cover is gorgeous. Do you have much input into your covers? Is it at this point?
Yes.
Nice.
This again was an easy one.
Well, we did go through a couple of rounds because there were sort of figures on the front, and we didn't feel they were the right kinds of figures, and then we wanted the right kind of background. It's funny, we were very
colors,
and we were like, okay, this and this and this and this. And we're okay, this looks good. But you sort of forget that subjective reaction you have to a certain type of cover. And it wasn't until I took it out of the box, the author copies arrived, and I took it out of the box. I was looking at it going, oh my gosh, this is beautiful. This is perfect. And you sort of forget when you're going through those rounds of like tweaking here and tweaking there. And what color should that be? That there's this wonderful emotional response you get to a cover that's just right.
Yeah, and it's summer. It's a very summer,
It's a very summer. It's a perfect summer book club book. It's a perfect, as with all of you always, your books are entertaining, but so full of depth and so full of, complexity and nuance. I mean, the writing is so crisp and strong, and every part of it is just so great. You're also fabulous, and you've been so kind and spent so much time with us. I know some readers are asking about the mugs. Can readers buy the mugs?
I forgot to bring mine. I'm sorry. These are swag. They're kind of giveaway. Technically, I don't think we're allowed to sell them because we don't actually own the copyright ourselves.
So you could probably, don't say we said this. It's very easy to design your own. Just take a JPEG of the cover and go on to Cafe.
You've heard this. This is not something you endorse. at all. But
But that's why you need to follow us on social media, because we are always doing giveaways. And this was part of one of the giveaway swag bags. So just sign up now, sign up for my mailing list on my website, because then you will know when our next book is coming out, what the title is, and then you can pay attention, because I'm telling you, the book we're working on right now is going to have the best cover and the best title ever.
We've actually already designed it all. We've done everything except write the book.
I love it. Can you give us a little hint of what it's going to be about, or where it's going to be set?
Okay, Ray?
Ready? Okay. Scotland.
We're going back to our
direction. Sorry, guys.
Yeah, so it's going to be really, really good.
We're finally getting the Scottish book.
Yes. And it is.
Yeah, and do sign up for Karen's newsletter, because I think Lauren and I are not quite as consistent.
Yes, and we all have our own different stuff for that. I'm very active on Facebook and Instagram. Karen has an amazing newsletter. And I've
kind of gone off social. I'm still on social media, but I'm not quite as. I've been stepping back a little bit from social media lately. It was starting to be a little overwhelming for me, and I wasn't getting all the focus on the writing that I wanted to do. So I'm not quite as responsive now as I used to be. I'm sorry if I don't get back to things as quickly as I used to, but I do eventually get back.
You guys are all wonderful.
Beatriz is always the best at swag design and giving away book talks. So be sure to go to any Beatriz book talk, because she actually remembers to bring the stuff.
Yeah, I did not just really do a very good job of advertising my own social media and newsletter. I'm sorry. But yes, do sign up for them. It's not like I did ever do any of it. Yes.
I have a newsletter
where you just have to look for them.
Yeah, I have a newsletter.
You sign up for my newsletter today.
Yeah. Oh.
We will send you Team W swag. I know.
Lady, guys, are you listening to this? You will get. Oh my gosh!
We had the tour shirt made. As you know, going on book tour together is the reason why we write these books, and getting our
W.
This is the official tour shirt.
Okay.
So we thought, well, hey, just like rock bands have tour shirts,
right?
I
will randomly.
Just wait till you see the tour shirt for the next book.
Oh yes. I have 3 left. I'm going to randomly look for randomly go through people who signed up today and randomly select 3 people. So make sure I have your snail mail address to get a tour t-shirt.
Just like the band.
I love it.
Except we don't trash any hotel rooms, except by accident when we overturn the room service.
I love your characters on the hotel rooms. Some of the characters would be trashing the hotel rooms.
Possibly.
Yes. So sign up for Karen's mailing list, and while you're at it, follow everyone on social media. Sign up for everyone's mailing lists. Check out their live events when they are near you, or even not so near you. If you want to have an excuse to take a little trip of your own with some girlfriends of your own, which clearly is at the heart of all this is friendship and colleagues, 100%. Respect, and doing something awesome and making something really cool together, which is exactly that's the best thing. One last question, before we head out. Gilded Age or 1950s? Which party are you going to? Are you going to one of Mrs. Astor's parties, or are you going to the Tiffany Diamond party?
I'm going to the Tiffany ball only because there are too many restraints in the Gilded Age. In the 50s, you were a little more.
Yeah, I think you could sneak behind the bleachers more in the 1950s. Yeah.
All right, so we've got 2 for 1950s, Lauren.
Oh, I'm gonna go Gilded Age.
I knew you would.
Go ahead with your corset.
Just like you two. I love it, ladies. Thank you so much. Thank you, Jenna, for joining us today. You are fabulous. I love you all. And we will see you next week on Lit Chick on a Mighty Blaze. We have the fabulous Brooklyn Foster to talk about her book on Gin Lane. Thank you all. And thank you to our producer, Julie Gerstenblatt, who has been behind the scenes doing everything and facilitating the online discussion. We love Julie, and she's amazing. Thank you all. We'll see you next time.
Thank you. Bye-bye.